I'm John Little of OmegaShock.com, and this is the Weekend ShockCast for Saturday, March 22nd, 2014. This past week gave us the opportunity to look more closely at the moves Russia is making on the global chessboard, and we also took the opportunity to shine some light upon the apparent insanity of Western motivations. The thought that the Western powers are following a well-rehearsed and carefully created plan, well, it's unsettling. Of course, it's unsettling because there is a part of us that still looks at the world as normal. We have a routine that appears to us to be natural and appropriate, and we keep asking ourselves, why shouldn't things continue on as they do now? Well, I have a list of reasons why they can't continue, but they pale by comparison to the single largest one. God said so. It really is that simple. God has decreed the beginning and the ending of all things, and we are rapidly approaching the end. The fact that this is hard to understand means nothing. Oh, and if you think what is happening is bizarre, well, to paraphrase Al Jolson, you ain't seen nothing yet. So what did we talk about this week? It was a possible move by Russia against Algerian pipelines, Russian financial weapons of mass destruction, closer Russian ties to Iran, the deep state, and the deeper than deep state. And let's get to those articles. On Monday, it was Next Moves Algeria. It didn't take the gift of prophecy to tell you that Crimea would secede from Ukraine and join the Russian Federation. That was an easy move on the part of Russia, which was why it was one of the early decisions by Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Of course, we were originally expecting something else, which is yet another reason why he chose Crimea to begin his confrontation with the Euro-American offensive in Russia's Ukrainian backyard. Well, Putin will play his natural gas trump card eventually, but he will do it at a time when and a place where he gets the most benefit, and that moment in time will be during the winter of 2014-2015. Do you think that it was a coincidence that the West staged their coup in late February? Of course not. We don't do coincidence theory here. That's for the mainstream media. So what's next? Natural gas is an interesting commodity. It's difficult to transport and difficult to store. It takes years and years of infrastructure development to get it from point A to point B. But there's a lot of it, and it's relatively easy to get out of the ground. Unfortunately, there's no new natural gas infrastructure getting ready to go online anytime soon. So why did the U.S. and Europe choose this moment in time to start this war now? Good question. And we'll answer that as we go along. But let's talk a bit about Europe's vulnerable situation vis-a-vis natural gas. Remember when I said that Europe gets 30% of her natural gas from Russia? The rest of Europe's natural gas comes from Norway and Algeria, with some from the Netherlands and a few smaller sources. In my article, I show a map of the network of these natural gas pipelines. But let's ask something about Algeria. Algeria. Do you think that Algeria is a very stable place? I don't think so either. They have terrorist problems. The attack on the Amenas gas facility in Algeria in January of 2013 severely damaged gas production when 30 terrorists attacked the facility and held foreign nationals hostage. To make matters worse, Algeria has been having problems with declining output. Do you think that it might be possible for Russia to use Algerian rebels to turn off the natural gas coming from Algeria? You can bet that he can, and will. Getting jihadis to run around and blow up things isn't a very hard thing to do, and there are those big natural gas pipes going from Algeria through Tunisia. Is Tunisia a very stable place? Remember that the Arab Spring started in Tunisia. It wouldn't take much of an investment on Russia's part to convince jihadis to blow up pipelines in Tunisia. To see an example of how effective terrorists can be in shutting off the flow of natural gas, all you need to do is look at the Sinai. Terrorists have been blowing up pipelines there several times a year. Then there are the natural gas pipelines that go underwater to Italy and Spain. What do you think would happen to that pipeline if someone accidentally dropped something explosive on top of that underwater pipe? Accidents happen. What a coincidence. You also need to know that Europe has a very inadequate storage capacity for natural gas, and while this winter was mild for Europe, no one can guarantee that the same will happen next year. All of this means that the U.S. and Europe have about 6 months to deal with this natural gas vulnerability. The problem is that this isn't the only weakness that the U.S. and the EU suffer from. Not by a long shot. Are you ready for this? On Tuesday, it was Next Move's Financial Weapons of Mass Destruction. I just finished reading an article about the deep state. Thanks, Steve. Unfortunately, the author, Professor Peter Dale Scott, has barely scratched the surface. But his article is useful in that it gives the neophyte an introduction to the idea that there are events happening below the surface. For those of you new to this idea, please consider the thought that where there is one secret level of power, well, there are undoubtedly more. The deep state is just one of many, many levels that lie below the surface of current events. I hope to talk about those deep state and deeper than deep state elements as we work our way through this world war that is happening before our very eyes. And yes, it really is a world war, and one day we will call it World War III. That article on the deep state was appropriate because what is happening now doesn't make sense. And when powerful people make decisions that do not make sense, there's a reason that they aren't telling you. The psychopaths in Washington, D.C. really aren't as insane as you think they are. But we'll leave that discussion for another time. Let's talk about the arsenal of weapons that the East and the West have pointed at each other. Since the mainstream media has undoubtedly been talking about missiles, tanks, planes, and ships, I don't need to. I don't even need to talk about the nuclear weapons that both sides have. What I want to talk about are the weapons that are at least as bad as the nuclear ones, financial weapons of mass destruction, or FWMDs. Warren Buffett is famous for referring to derivatives as financial weapons of mass destruction, and he's right. The banks successfully use them to extort money from the U.S. government. They've been used to destroy other banks, and FWMDs are one of the ways that some banks get to be too big to fail, or TBTF. And the U.S. government does have a few FWMDs of their own. The FWMDs in the arsenal of the United States that are targeted against Russia are, well, I'm thinking hard here, sanctions. And that's pretty much it. Yes, it's true that there are a few other minor weapons, but they really aren't significant. They could turn off SWIFT. They could engage in attacks on the Russian banking system like they did in Cyprus. But the Russians aren't stupid and have alternatives to all of that. So we're pretty much left with sanctions. Now, before you discount sanctions as an effective weapon, let me say that they could really hurt Russia. Oil and gas sales make up about 30% of Russia's GDP and represent more than 60% of her exports. Turning off those exports would do severe damage to the Russian economy, more than that 30% number would seem to indicate. Please remember that there is something that economists call the multiplier effect. It basically means that when a unit of currency is placed into an economy, it goes from hand to hand, growing in size each time it changes hands. For the U.S., the multiplier is generally about 9, meaning that a dollar injected into an economy multiplies 9 times. The reverse is also true. Take a dollar out of the system and all those 8 extra multiplied dollars disappear. This is what would happen to the Russian economy. Shut off 60% of her exports and her economy would crumble, assuming that we could get everyone to cooperate in that shutoff. What do the Russians have? They have the ability to completely obliterate the economy of the United States. Did you know that Russia sells its natural gas in U.S. dollars? Did you know that it also sells crude oil in U.S. dollars? If you want natural gas or oil from Russia, you must have U.S. dollars to get it. To get U.S. dollars, you need to make something and sell it to the U.S. so that they will give you dollars for whatever you trade. And since the Americans aren't stupid, they want a low price. This means that the price you sell to Americans will be lower than anywhere else because you need as many dollars as you can get to buy oil and natural gas. So, what happens when the world stops needing U.S. dollars to buy their oil and natural gas? Prices in the U.S. would go up because the dollar is no longer in demand. In fact, everything that has any component that is imported goes up immediately. And pretty much everything in the U.S. has an imported component. The loss of the petrodollar would be the beginning of a catastrophe that would sweep America from coast to coast and destroy everything in its path. America would truly fall apart. For more information, Dave Hodges has an excellent article on the subject. All of this is why Sergei Glaziev said this a couple weeks ago. Quote, We have wonderful economic and trade relations with our southern and eastern partners, he emphasized. We will find a way not just to eliminate our dependence on the U.S., but also profit from these sanctions. Close quote. It was a shot across the bow. Think of it as a nuclear test. This was Russia saying informally that they are willing to destroy the U.S. if America goes too far in this sanctions talk. In my article, I provide a link to what Jim Sinclair said about what Russia can do to collapse the U.S. economy. That video was on Greg Hunter's USAWatchdog.com, and Jim mentioned a number of things that you need to hear, not just this Russian threat. Russia has a number of other weapons in its arsenal of financial weapons of mass destruction, but that, by far, is the biggest, and that weapon dwarfs anything that the U.S. has. So is the U.S. crazy? No, remember what I said about what it means when powerful people act in a way that seems crazy. There's a reason that they aren't telling you. That begs the question, what could they possibly want? Well, there are a number of possible reasons, but let me ask you to think back to my article on March 3rd, titled, Watch the Other Hand, Events in Ukraine Are a Misdirection, and my follow-up article. There are 2 videos that appeared in that first article, and I include them in the article I wrote on Tuesday. The first video is titled, Senior Obama Official Says We Are Going to Kill the Dollar. And the second video is titled, We'll Kill the Dollar. So, to answer your question, they're just going to kill the dollar. There's more to all this than what I've described above, but this article is already more than 1,100 words long, so let me summarize what I've said so far. U.S. and European sanctions would hurt Russia. Russia would then retaliate by offering oil and natural gas and other currencies, or better yet gold, pushing other oil-producing countries to do the same. This would destroy the value of the U.S. dollar and devastate the U.S. economy. America would descend into a death spiral of inflation, violence, and repression. Worse, all of that would destroy you. Are you ready for this? On Wednesday, we talked about the deep state. I briefly mentioned something yesterday called the deep state. I had just finished reading an article on the idea before starting to write and was impressed by the timeliness of the subject. The events in Ukraine are not what they appear to be. No, what's going on is the workmanship of the deep state. So what is this deep state? If you want a definition, look up state within a state, but I think that the Latin version works better. Imperium in imperio, the supreme power within the empire. That's what we have in the U.S. today, an empire. Worse, there's a supreme power within this empire, and it's gotten so bad that even the mainstream media is beginning to pick up on this topic. Even Bill Moyers interviewed Mike Lofgren on the deep state, and I include a video of that interview in the article. That Mike Lofgren, who you see interviewed by Bill Moyers, wrote an essay entitled Anatomy of the Deep State. By the way, I had trouble accessing Mike's website. Is it possible that the deep state is a little peeved at Mr. Lofgren's expose of their dirty dealings? Mike Lofgren's essay appears to have been the genesis of the article, The State, the Deep State, and the Wall Street Overworld, written by Peter Dale Scott. Professor Scott has written on this subject before and has much more to add on Mr. Lofgren's writing. Unfortunately, there are more murky depths that lie below even the deep state. I don't think that we need to determine how far down this all goes. It should be enough for us to know that Satan is at work using secretive organizations like the Illuminati and the Jesuits. It is more important to ask how closely current events are being scripted by these evil powers. The answer is that no one can really know for sure. Even those on the inside can't really know with absolute certainty. A friend of mine who rubs shoulders with these people remarked frequently that the elites who are running the world are looking for someone to unite them. That friend has been dead for several years, and I never really understood who he was, or what he was, until a couple years ago, long after he died. My point is that the elites are in competition with each other, and I suspect that what is playing out in Ukraine between the West and the East is a part of that competition. Having said that, God is at work within this competition. Gog and Magog are coming, and the results of that will shake the world. Are you ready for this? On Thursday, it was Next Moves Iran. There's been another move in the global chess match between the West and the East. As America and the EU fumble about for effective ways to respond to Russia's annexation of Crimea, Russia has leaped forward with another move: Iran. I was a little surprised by this gambit being played so soon, and it means that the situation might be accelerating far more quickly than we imagined. Of course, Russia may feel the need to move so quickly in order to outmaneuver the carefully laid plans of the Western elites. What got me started on this thought was an article picked up by the Drudge Report. Senior Russian diplomat: Moscow may change stance in Iranian nuke talks. I also offer a somewhat more in-depth version of the article. But my response is, whoops. So let's take a look at this move. Russia isn't stupid. They've seen the U.S. attempt to encircle Russia and neutralize whatever hegemony is left over from the glory days of the Soviet Union. So in response, Russia has quietly reached out and made connections with those nations that also do not like America's growing imperial aspirations. An early example was China. Russia reached out to China soon after the fall of the Soviet Union and made deals over natural gas and military cooperation. This early development gave rise to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or the SCO. It was also something of a surprise since Russia and China had a long history of enmity. But this situation with Iran may be even more interesting. Russia and Iran have never been friendly. In fact, conflict has been the order of the day for most of their history. Even now, they are competitors in the global market for oil and natural gas. But they have something very powerful that is pushing them together: the United States of America. Anyone who thinks that Russia and Iran would make perfect allies is insane. Russia is atheist with a resurgent Russian Orthodox Church. Iran is Shiite. Russia sells natural gas and oil to China and Europe. Iran would love to muscle Russia out of the way and do that too. Russia wants quiet and secure borders. Iran generally has a problem with anyone's borders being quiet and secure. Russians drink vodka. Iranians think that people who drink vodka are going to hell. But the enemy of my enemy is my friend, so they're going to get along wonderfully. But there's something more than shared interests at work here. Did you know that Iran is the only country that we can clearly identify in the great army of Gog and Magog? Ezekiel 38 describes the list of who is included in the Gog and Magog alliance that comes down to attack Israel. Here's that section. It's Ezekiel 38, verses 2 through 6. Let me read that for you here. Quote, "Son of man, set thy face toward Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophesy against him. And say, Thus saith the Lord Jehovah, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. And I will turn thee about, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed in full armor of a great company, with buckler and shield, all of them handling swords. Persia, Cush, and Put with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer and all his hordes, the house of Togarmah in the uttermost parts of the north, and all his hordes, even many peoples with thee." Close quote. Let's see. We have Gog, Magog, Rosh, Meshech, Tuval, Persia, Cush, Put, Gomer, and Togarmah. There's something of a question about the identity of each of these, except Persia, which is Iran. Whoever enters into an alliance with Iran in the last days is a candidate for inclusion in that list. Take a look at a few headlines from almonitor.com. Iran opens new chapter in relations with Russia. Ukraine crisis could strengthen Russia-Iran-China ties. Look for more assertive Russia in Middle East. And here are a couple of other recent headlines from other sources. Russia. Iran to boost bilateral relations and implement SCO agreements. Iran, Russia's trump card. Russia warns, we'll play the Iran card against US-EU. Those headlines should make you sit up and take notice, if you are following our Lord's commandment to watch and pray in Luke 21:36. Oh, and there's this very, very interesting website, Iran.ru. a Russian website about Iran? Now that is very interesting. The point is that this move by Russia's president, could he be Gog, has drawn us very close to the most pivotal event before the rise of the Antichrist, the completion of the prophecy that began in Ezekiel 36 and ends in Ezekiel 39. When this grand prophecy of Ezekiel 36 through 39 is complete, our world will never be the same. And then the Antichrist comes. Are you ready for this? And on Friday, it was the deeper than deep state. As we watch what is happening in Ukraine and the rest of the world, you could be excused for thinking that this is all mindless insanity, that there is no rhyme or reason behind what is happening. And on the surface, you would be completely correct. But as I pointed out in my article, The Deep State, there are events and motivations that lie below the surface. However, when looking at what the deep state is up to, the apparent insanity persists. Why on earth would the apparatchiks of the U.S. State Department and the CIA involve themselves in a series of moves that can only end in complete disaster? Well, it's very simple. There is a deeper than deep state. I've known about the deeper than deep state since I was a teenager. I read None Dare Call It Conspiracy by Gary Allen in the mid-'70s, not long after it was first published in 1971. That book helped me realize that there really was a shadow world where the rich and powerful made themselves even more rich and powerful, at our expense. I recommend that you read that book. The book is free to download and read, and I provide a link in my article. There is also a computer-generated audio version that you can download from the same site. Once you read and see the evidence and the patterns of evidence of such a deep, deep conspiracy, you will never be able to close your eyes to it again. Well, that's not completely true, but I'll get to that a little later. The point is that there really are rich and powerful men and women who have betrayed their countries, their communities, and even their families. They have used their money to create false conflicts and false ideologies. They have attacked and destroyed anything and everything that is good and that contributes to personal freedom. All of this is a conspiracy fact, not conspiracy theory. I just saw a video last night that does an excellent job of illustrating many of the main points that you will see in None Dare Call It Conspiracy. That video is Joel Skousen, the hidden power structure of the left-right paradigm, and it was done by Infowars.com. That video should do a pretty good job of connecting many of the dots for you. This should help you understand that the conflict between the U.S. and Russia is really just puppet theater. Unfortunately, the deep thinkers among us will not be satisfied by these revelations. Since the late 1970s, I knew that there were dark deeds done by the rich and powerful. I knew that they moved the world according to their own evil desires, and for a while that knowledge was enough. However, as I began to look deeper and deeper into history and the motivations of the players in history, I began to realize that there was something missing. Explaining away the motivations of the rich and powerful as merely the love of money rapidly became an inadequate explanation. The problem is that conspiracies have a bad habit of failing. The more people involved, the greater the risk of someone screwing up and unmasking the conspiracy. This meant that I had something of a problem. The facts of conspiracy were undeniable. Anyone who claims that there are no conspiracies is truly ignorant of history. But my research showed that conspiracies were virtually impossible. So what was going on? Well, just like anyone with an insoluble problem, I put the problem on the shelf and left it there. Then along came April 5th, 2011. I was shocked out of my gourd to realize that we were in terrible shape. That led to the genesis of this site and my first post on August 22nd, 2011. But it took another year to realize who and what were making these conspiracies work. Even then, I had to recheck, double-check, and triple-check ad nauseum before I was ready to step out and talk about what and who were behind the deeper-than-deep state. Even then, I had to tiptoe my way into the subject. I rolled out a series of 9 articles that really took you through the genesis of something called the Illuminati. I still have to pinch myself to see if I'm dreaming. It is so hard to believe that anyone can be this despicable and depraved. But the Bible says it, and I believe it, and if I ever need more proof, all I need to do is look at the historical record. So there really is a deeper than deep state, but there is something even deeper still. It may be hard to see, but you will find it lurking in these seemingly insane decisions that cannot even be explained by the deeper than deep state. These lurkers have found the ultimate answer to the failure of conspiracies: religion. Nothing glues these conspiracies like religion, but not just any old religion, Luciferianism. You might want to call it Satanism, and most people will do so, but Luciferianism would be more accurate, because it is a false light, and it is oh so attractive to those who wish enlightenment without that humiliating need for salvation. And yes, Luciferianism is the religion of the proud. And the chief organization behind Luciferianism is the Illuminati. Are you ready for this? Do more than just think about it. This has been the Weekend ShockCast for Saturday, March 22nd, 2014. I'm John Little of OmegaShock.com.